to our employer forum. Great to see such a great interest in what I think is a very hot topic at the moment, looking at data analytics. You know, we've been hearing a lot, I think, in recent years about automation across various industries, but particularly in accountancy. I remember the scare stories from a few years ago around, the robots coming to take away the jobs. But I think it's already clear. I remember I was talking to a partner of one of the big four accountancy firms. It's probably 4 years ago or so. They predicted that within a couple of years, their intake of chartered accountancy students would drop 80%. Just ask if everyone can stay on mute, just while we're chatting, just trying to avoid any background noise. So if everyone can stay on mute, that'd be fantastic. But yes, I was talking to this partner of a big four firm. They thought their intake of trainees would drop by 80% as a result of the impact of automation, effectively doing away with the need for accountants and therefore doing away with the need for trainee accountants. Actually hasn't been the case. In fact, intakes have actually been growing. So for me, to be honest, the activities that are kind of already and actually will increasingly be dominated by, the machines, to be honest, are the activities I'd rather not be doing. It's the data processing, it's searching for information. For me, automation, AI, technology, and we'll move on and talk about the role that data analytics can play. It's actually reducing the time we spend on low value activities. I think it's actually increasing the time we spend on higher value activities. And not only is it increasing the time, it's making that time more impactful. I think it's changing the role of an accountant quite dramatically, and it's changing the skill set I think that accountants need. But for me, technology is not replacing humans. And I've heard the word augmenting. I think it's either augmenting or maybe amplifying the role of humans. Right, here's one for the chat box. Right, fastest on the finger. So if I give you a name in the chat box, what are they famous for in one word? Gary Kasparov. Ian's first to the prize, but we've got a few there. So chess, absolutely. So Gary Kasparov. Now the reason I raised him, actually, we were having a little chat in the waiting room before we started. So me, Stephen, and Chris were having a chat about. Anyone seen Queen's Gambit? That massive Netflix hit that's been around. So obviously, great drama, but focusing on chess. But Gary Kasparov was the world number one, Grandmaster chess champion, world number one for 20 years, and arguably, therefore, the single most successful human player ever. But actually, Gary Kasparov, I think, is more famous for a match he lost. And again, to the chat box, who did Gary Kasparov lose a famous chess match to? We've already got it from Chris. Deep Blue, 1997, I think it was, wasn't it, Chris? That Gary Kasparov actually lost to a chess computer. First time that a human grandmaster had been beaten by a computer. And actually, since that day, humans have never been able to beat the chess computers. But what's interesting to me is there's a derivation, which actually Gary Kasparov himself started. There's a derivation called centaur chess. If you imagine the idea of a centaur, one of those mythical creatures, which is part horse, part human. And centaur chess is actually where you get a human player augmented by a computer. So effectively combining the brute force and processing speed of the computer with maybe the creativity and the ingenuity of the human. Actually, centaurs can beat any chess computer. I think is that indication that when you combine human and machine power, you actually get the best of both worlds. You actually get an even more powerful, product. So we're going to be talking this morning about data analytics. Thank you, Andy. R2D2. I always preferred C3PO, frankly, but thanks for your contribution. Thanks for coming. So we're going to be talking about data analytics. Now, later on, we're going to have a little panel, and I've managed to gather some really, I think, interesting experts who can give us some insight from different perspectives about where we are and where we're going with data analytics. We're then, towards the end of the session, going to be hearing from the accountancy awarding bodies, because I think, not just technology, but data analytics is becoming, I think of it like a Venn diagram of accountancy and data that is gradually blurring, and I think is overlapping more and more. So it'll be interesting to hear from the accounting awarding bodies, AATA, ACCA, CIMA, ICAEW, where they see things going. We've got some great insight experts from those awarding bodies, and actually we're going to be finishing off with colleague of mine, Helen Kerrigan, actually going to be finishing off and talking a little bit about some more stuff that we're going to be doing. But to start with, I want to hand over to Paul Wardle from Inflow. So this is the data analytics software that is now embedded in two currently of the ICAEW exams, the audit exam at professional level and the corporate reporting exam at the advanced level, who's going to just give us 15 minutes on his views on the kind of current state and direction that we're going. So Paul, if you want to take over at this point.
Absolutely, yeah, love to, Gareth. Thank you very much, and certainly concur with a lot of the things you've just been talking about there as well. I may ask you, and you've already done it, Gareth, to allow me to share my screen, which is brilliant, and then I'll start to share my kind of slideshow, which certainly isn't long, but just a nice kind of introduction as well into everything we kind of want to talk about today. So this session really is about looking at that role of the data analytics in accountancy and how we've potentially been possibly changed from where we were kind of 5 to 10 years ago, and where the future is as well. So where we kind of potentially going to. And as part of that, what I really wanted to look at was, briefly to just describe what data analytics is to me and to Inflow as well, give you a bit of an overview of what that looks like. Also look, and I'm sure this is going to be a flavour of everything in part of the session, around the skill set needed for the future. Our accountants actually changing skill set, and actually when we look at the embedded part of the software within the ICAEW exams, what are we testing? What are we looking for from that, so that everyone obviously in the webinar today can obviously really harness the power of that. And then I wanted just to show you how data analytics is applied to that accountancy profession and how we do that, and the power that really kind of gives us in terms of providing real world business insights and solutions as well. So just a quick brief summary of where I'm from and what kind of my expertise is. I have been in the audit profession, I have been in the data analytics pool also. I have kind of led a number of staff and kind of looking at audits around those FTSE 100 clients as well. And this is my absolute passion, without a doubt, data analytics in audit, in accountancy, and those emerging technologies is something I'm absolutely really passionate about. And part of my role is to show accounting firms and professional services firms how to really embed this software within their processes, within their methodology, and really get to walk through that whole process with them. So that is my passion, but no one obviously likes to talk about themselves too long. So this is very much what Inflow is. So for anyone obviously on the call who hasn't been introduced to Inflow already, it was a solution designed by Mark Edmondson and Graham Clark, who are our two co-founders, a solution designed and built by accountants for accountants. So I think that's why we're quite unique in what we do, because we're not here to be a disruptor to the accounting profession, but actually more of an enabler, is how we kind of put it, because we want to be able to do the job better, with more accuracy, with more quality, with more kind of effectiveness. And I think doing that, and I think Gareth, you touched on this as well, moving away from that compliance activities that auditors and accountants are generally thought of being, into more of those advisory opportunities that we have as well. So hopefully I'll show you exactly how that can be done today. And we don't kind of leave people to figure things out like certain software firms in the world would do. We kind of really want to be part of that journey with you constantly as we go, and we're trying to meet those objectives of what you're trying to do as well. So as I kind of just progress on to my kind of next slide, really for me, accountancy, like many other professions, has gone through unprecedented change, obviously, like I said, in the last 5 years to 10 years, and continues to do so. And I think technology and data analytics are certainly what seems to be what I would call turbo in the engine at the moment. As the world we live in is very much data driven, those businesses and finance professionals who can harness that power, and what it brings will most certainly be those ones that are the most successful. So really concentrating on that green circle towards the bottom left, but also not forgetting exactly what Gareth's mentioned already this morning about the fact that that red dot is central to everything in terms of the automation and in terms of the data that you get. Because as we know, and looking at this overview, you know, data analytics can only be kind of unleashed, if you like, from that top right section in the area here to the bottom left, if you have good data and the quality of that data. And we do this really, really well within Inflow in terms of that automated ingestion of data from every single accounting system in the world, any ERP system. You'll recognize so many of those kind of really key areas out there in terms of RPA and process mining, machine learning, AI. Those are the things that I'll be touching on today, and hopefully just give you a little bit more of an insight into what they mean in the real life and into the real world. So they're the two areas that I really want to kind of concentrate on as we scroll through. And I know we've got Adam on the call as well today from ICAEW, and just to kind of bring people up to speed in terms of what we touched on in the first session. We talked about how Inflow is embedded into that ICAEW exams, and we saw just a few weeks ago exactly how that really, really came to light in terms of the students that are sat those exams and participated in Inflow as well as that ICAEW exam. However, the key message that we talked about before, we have been talking about, Adam and I, for a good 18 months to 2 years, even before that historic day just a few weeks ago, is what are we actually testing? We're not testing how good a student is at using Inflow or using software in itself. We're actually testing the skill set of what the future accountant looks like. And I think that's really, really key to kind of get across. And that really provoked a lot of kind of further questions I had in my mind as well about this session, but also just about, well, what does the future accountant look like? What kind of skill sets would they normally have? And I think this is really, really apparent because it's always the first question that I get asked, you know, do we need specific skills to be an accountant for the future? And you'll see the three areas that we, you know, always get brandished about when we talk about that. Do we need to be proficient in SQL scripting or R or Python, or would it be good to have that programming knowledge? And actually, we've seen a firm over in the US who wanted to test everything that was within Inflow. And I think that's a typical accountant, isn't it? We want to kind of know what's behind the scenes. How does that really, really work? And they spent a good 6 to 12 months testing everything, going through every formula, every algorithm, wanting to be clear on how something works. And I suppose, is that a bad thing? I wouldn't say so, because at the end of the day, what they presumed and got to that endpoint was exactly where we were. And they obviously trust that software now, obviously, to do what they're trying to do. But for me, I think it's about those areas at the bottom. It's actually about making better decisions. So let that kind of data drive better decisions, more informed choices, and that skill set and knowledge is exactly what we want to apply. And I've got a bit of a quote. This is actually just one thing that I kind of thought about in my own mind was, you know, I think it's better to let data drive where you get to, you know, and what I say there is, and what I'm trying to mean is, don't always go from point A to B. You know, why don't you take a bit of a different way? Why don't you take the scenic route at first to offer different views on what something might be? Because actually going that scenic route might be exactly the way you want to go in the future. It might not be the most efficient way at first, but in terms of the end, in terms of the quality, the better decision making that you had, the informed choices, maybe in the end, actually, it really will be the best decision. And we've even seen customers and clients and professional services firms who've gone down the route of saying, well, actually, we think it's really important that we give these other skills like R and Python and programming knowledge to accountants. And actually, that particular firm that I'm thinking about has now moved in terms of their thought processes from what they thought 5 years ago to now we're saying, actually, what's really important is probably just thinking about the skill set of that accountant compared to a data analyst, because actually, are they too different? And do we want similar skills to be actually applied to both? Because when I started to really research this and what an accountant skill set looks like compared to a data analyst, you'll see those 6 particular areas were exactly the same from a data analyst to an accountant. So being an accountant is a bit like being a data analyst, and similarly being a data analyst to an accountant, because you are looking at a high level of mathematical ability. You are looking at both areas being people who've got problem solving skills, you know, having a methodical and logical approach to things, and being able to plan work, meet deadlines. And then key, obviously part of that is having that accuracy and attention to detail as well. And I think that's really important for both. And I think those skill sets are very aligned to what we actually really want from the future accountant. Because as we know, the role of that accountant or finance professional is accelerating in terms of the change that they're going through. And data analytics and AI certainly influence what, you know, those people do on a day-to-day basis. But it's data analytics in particular that's really driving that change from collecting data. And we've always seen people collecting data and huge data storage warehouses and things. But actually for me, it's seeing the data. It's visually seeing the data. And you'll see just from the software that we have, I've given you kind of 4 visual representations of how we use that data analytics. And what I really mean about seeing the data is, you know, we know data is around us, but actually putting that in a meaningful way that helps us shape our thoughts and our decisions, that can be the difficult part. And I think that's the part that we really need to break down and talk through about, you know, how we do it. So just looking about how we do it at Inflow, we actually do it as part of a series of different modules. So I'm certainly not going to go through all the descriptions on the page there, but you'll be able to see that different modules do different things within the data analytics kind of world. So we've got, you know, Inflow Detect for an auditor is really important because it can identify those transactions demonstrating unusual characteristics and posing a greater risk. So that's going to be really important for someone to look at. But look at the other modules in there as well. We're moving from what an auditor or an accountant has to do in terms of compliance into more of that value-added insights piece. You know, we have very kind of intuitive dashboards that are really dynamic, they're really visual. And I think Gareth even touched on this word earlier on as well, impactful, really impactful. And what we see is that convergence of techniques such as all of those buzzwords again, advanced data analytics, you know, RPA, process mining, machine learning, AI, that convergence of all those things put within one place. So you actually be able to access all those different things within the software. And just a couple of quick representations of how we do that. We use data analytics very much for fraud detection within the Inflow software. And what we look at is high impactful visualizations. We look at huge data sets. So we ingest data using our automation tools from accounting systems with millions and millions of lines. I think 6 months ago, we actually ingested data with an accounting system where we looked at FTSE 100 client with over 400 million lines worth of transactions. Now, as you can imagine, for an accountant or an auditor, trying to go through that would be an absolute nightmare. So what we do within the software and the data analytics visualizations is we then are able to look at the transactions on this heat map, as we call it, which are the most impactful on profit and in terms of the transaction frequency as well. So we look for, you know, ones that are really occurring with a higher risk of being interested in fraud or error. And then we use our artificial intelligence, and that's why we've got that HI button, because we always call it hybrid intelligence, because, you know, trusting AI is fantastic. AI is going to be, you know, absolutely huge if it isn't already in the world. But using an accountant's knowledge and experience of that business is always going to be a hybrid between the two. You can't always trust artificial intelligence. It has to be with that professional skepticism, with that experience of the business. And I think, you know, part of that, the AI even looks for things like blank descriptions within the data sets, keywords, uneven patterns, unusual behaviors that are transactions being posted within that data set, just around fraud detection. Then we have another module, our revenue cascade, that looks at business process mining, you know, and it looks for those unusual revenue transactions. It tries to identify transactions bypassing processes or controls. We're trying to monitor receivable conversion to cash and discounting or write-offs, reviewing sales tax treatments on sales invoices, and then we drill down and export those findings for further investigation. But part of that process mining technique is to analyze those revenue streams and identify what's non-standard. You know, what are those postings outside of the revenue cycle? Because they're the ones that an accountant and auditors share this with obviously their clients that they're auditing as well. We want to see those transaction flows outside of the cycle that we would expect to see. So those ones that are following the expected cycle, as we talk to auditors, are they the ones that you really want to be going down and doing some testing on because they're doing exactly, you know, the thing that you really want them to do? It's really those ones that are flowing outside of that cycle that you are most interested in. So that's another way that we use data analytics to really drive that future accountant and how they're using, you know, the intelligence within AI and machine learning, and here certainly business process mining. One of the other techniques that we've got is looking at risk in routine. So we use that artificial intelligence to actually say, have we got a machine that can learn from past data sets and where auditors or accountants have put risks and assigned them to certain areas? So within the software, they could assign them to certain routines within there, and actually having that and that knowledge from certain accountants based off whether it's in a certain industry or certain region within the country, actually being able to harness that and use that machine learning to actually then recommend where an accountant or an auditor would start to look at risk is a really, really kind of key driver in a lot of this as well. And then as I progress on as well, one of the presentations I did actually, when we could actually go and visit people and present in live, was all around how you measure performance. How can data analytics actually measure performance? We have a module within Inflow that looks at those visualizations around financial KPIs, you know, statistics and measures of how do we benchmark against something that looks normal or doesn't look normal. So how can you do that and compare between all of those things? And auditors are very much pushed down that route of, you know, like we've mentioned already, moving from compliance and now into more value add advisory work. And this is one way that we do it. So I always pose a few questions around this, and it is, you know, if you thought about,
just as you come into this, I'll just give you a 2-minute warning before we move to the panel discussion. So
fantastic. Yeah, no, that's perfect timing. You know, thinking about those questions around credit period compared to industry average, thinking about risk and impact for business, you can see the answers on the screen there. We give visual representation of KPIs on the top right there, their data set in comparison to a similar region or industry average. And then from that, we're able to recommend, you know, a review of performances that an auditor would then go and take, obviously, with that particular client. You know, when we do that again, if you think about other KPIs, we've got over 70 within just this module. Think about revenue transactions and reversals in the year. Well, actually, if you could reduce that down to, you know, an industry average, what would that give that person, like Gareth mentioned earlier on, in terms of that impactful things that they can do, a more value-added thing rather than a compliance kind of wasting potentially admin time? You've got to move into what we call those opportunities that you can actually have. So whether you're thinking about trying to implement technology at any particular stage here, I think one that we potentially see a lot of is that professional services firms look at how they can elevate their existing services. And I truly believe that it's the techniques and the data analytics that can really provide huge value to clients. And it's that area that we always, you know, talk to clients about and actually try to get them to think more about an advisory work that they can do and try and get them up to obviously that redefining area just in the top right here as well. So I'll leave you just with these three thoughts just before obviously we'll move on to the panel, and certainly happy to take any discussions. But in summary for me, data analytics gives these three things, in essence, huge value, better business insights, much more enhanced decision making for an accountant or an auditor, and that improved quality and efficiency of obviously that work that they're going on to perform. So hopefully that's given you a really good insight into what Inflow does and my thoughts on data analytics as well in the profession. Happy to take absolutely any questions right now. I don't know if we've got any time for that, Gareth, but certainly drop them into the chat.
If people want to post any questions in the chat box, you can respond to them through the chat box, and that way everyone will be able to see them actually. So I think that would probably work well. I'm intrigued particularly about that HI. I mean, that hybrid intelligence doesn't sound dissimilar to that centaur chess thing we sort of talked about right at the start, that kind of bringing together the best of both worlds. So I do hope you're paying a royalty to Gary Kasparov for that idea. But we're now going to move into. Thank you so much, Paul. That's fantastic. So you keep an eye on the chat box for any questions that come through that you might be able to help with. I can see there's already some chat around some of the tools, which is fantastic. So we're now going to move into a bit of a panel discussion. I've got three different panelists for us to hear from, and I've got a few questions I'm going to pose to them. So perhaps as each panelist maybe starts their first answer, they could introduce themselves and say, you know, where they're from. But we have Chris, Stephen and Mike who are going to be helping us with some thoughts here. And again, for anyone in the audience, if you've got any experience or opinions on the questions I'm asking, chuck them in the chat box. It'd be great to see what everyone else's thoughts are. But actually, I mean, Chris, I might start with you actually. Going back to that very original point, you know, very broad brush, is tech, such as AI and data analytics, is it rendering accountants obsolete, or quite the opposite, is it putting accountants in the strategic driving seat?
Great question, and thanks for being here. It's Chris Sargent, the editor and founder of Generation CFO, and I've been kind of looking at this problem for about 12 years after being in some big enterprises, Amazon, John Lewis, Vodafone, doing data analytics and other stuff in finance. So I think it's a complex answer, but the short answer is no, we are not going to be made obsolete. The thing is, we have, as humans, we have a habit of overestimating the ability of technology. And I think at the moment, we're also in a position of underestimating the same technology, particularly with AI. What is happening, I think, is people are sort of in two camps. They think we are potentially going to be, you know, automated, and therefore we have to go deep into the technology. We have to start learning R and Python and changing our roles. And then, you know, there's the others who just can't quite engage with it, you know, can't see that being their role, so they're sticking to their guns. And I think what we need to look at is much closer to the technology and the capability that's starting to emerge. And I think people jump to this conclusion that there's going to be this general AI, this Terminator type, you know, AI that's going to be able to do everything that an accountant does, or a solicitor, or, you know, any profession. But that's really not the case. You know, the use cases that we're seeing, and Inflow included, but there's, you know, thousands of companies out there doing this, they're really quite narrow AI solutions. You know, they are automating a single process, they're automating a task, they're improving a task. And as we know, accountants do lots of tasks, lots of things that are judgment based, and we're really a mix of things, not just a list of tasks that an AI can do. So I think we have to get much closer to the problem to sort of understand where we're at. I certainly don't think we're going to be made obsolete anytime soon. We've got a skills mix that can be flexed across the business very easily. I would love to see people getting much closer to this so they can drive it internally in their businesses. And I don't think we're quite there either.
Just picking up on your point there about skills mix, I mean, maybe if I can turn to Stephen actually, I mean, how do you think tech is changing the skill sets that accountants need in order to be able to drive value within their organisations?
I mean, if I could use you as an example, Gareth, I remember talking to you. I thought you might like that. I remember talking to you about 12 months ago, and you were telling me about, you know, when you were a trainee, and you spent a lot of time sitting in a dark room and entering data into a spreadsheet. And I think, you know, the way in which we would see accountants now is that, you know, they're much more, I guess, outward looking, much more sort of forward thinking. much more likely to be engaging with clients, with colleagues across the business. So, you know, rather than this all being about compliance now and data entry, I think it's much more around, you know, developing advisory skills, developing those personal skills to build relationships, whether that be with your clients, whether that be across the organization in which you work, and communications really, you know, being able to present data, being able to visualize it, being able to present it. You know, again, picking up with a word that I think you've all used so far, you know, looking at ways in which you can make that information and make what you do much more impactful. You know,
is there a danger, Stephen, that we get a bit of a generational divide? Because as you said, I mean, I was trained, I'm not sure I even had spreadsheets, if I'm perfectly honest, Stephen. It was the analysis paper that you used to have to fold out and write everything out. Do you think that, you know, does the younger generation find this just easier to engage with? Are the leaders of organizations the ones who are going to find it harder?
I think I would prefer to look at it a different way, and I think it's more of a mindset rather than an age thing. So I think if you've got people who perhaps are a little bit more proactive rather than reactive, and are actually seeking opportunities, that's the sort of person that I would want to work for, and that's the sort of person that I would expect to see as, you know, the effective leaders of organizations, where they might not have all of the answers, but they'll know the type of people that they want to recruit. And, you know, I think there's a role for everyone in this. I don't think it's about being young or old. I think it's about actually, you know, seeking the opportunities, embracing the tools that can make you more effective, and making sure that, you know, even if it's just a small number of them, you can use them effectively. And if you can't, find someone who can work with you who can.
I think whether it's, you know, technology, data analytics, I don't know, ethics, sustainability, you know, there's so much dynamic change in environments. I think lifelong learning is something we all have to embrace and adopt that really growth mindset. Mike, if I can call you in now, just in terms of what your thoughts are on the kind of current state of analytics adoption. It seemed from our poll earlier that perhaps data analytics is at an earlier stage than general technology adoption in accountancy.
Sure, thanks, Gareth. I'm Mike Willis. I am the Cambridge Judge Business School. I'm the program director for the Master of Accounting program, which is a part-time leadership and innovation program for accountants. And I agree with sort of the overall tone of what's been said regarding the adoption of analytics and and its replacement of human activities. I like to think of accounting and reporting as a trust activity. And trust is a human thing, and it's a judgment. And I know there are technologies designed to eliminate the need for trust, but those aren't widespread yet. So I agree with this idea of the human side of things still dominating and probably doing so for some time. But as far as the current state of analytics adoption, I like to think of it in terms of what are the forces that are shaping costs and benefits of analytics adoptions. So, we've heard about, maybe you've heard about the example from the American retailer Target that sent a teenage girl coupons for baby products, which really irritated her father. It turned out she was expecting a child, and Target knew before her father knew. How did they know this? Because their predictive algorithm had associated the purchasing of unscented lotions and mineral supplements with the future purchasing of baby products. This happened 10 years ago. So why did that happen 10 years ago? And why is the state of analytics adoption in accounting spaces different or perhaps lagging behind? Well, it's because the force is shaping the ROI here, right? Retail is low margin, high volume, it's extremely competitive. If you can drive traffic to physical stores and upsell customers and scale your analytics to millions of customers, then there's ROI on this investment and a big upside there. And so what are the forces shaping costs and benefits of analytics adoption on the cost side, what you might call the cost side around accounting? And I think that we know, we have this intuition in the sense that there's so much data there's got to be some strategic insight waiting. If I can just find it, if I can just put it together and understand it. And I think that's true. And I think there's a lot of insight that's waiting there to be unlocked. And so I think we're seeing some real some of the initial advances in narrow areas, with large data sets, which we can talk about a little bit more later.
Fantastic, thank you, Mike. Actually, I heard a quite entertaining story even a couple of years ago, which I think was around Walmart as well, actually in America, that using satellite imagery of car parks of Walmarts around America, actually they were able to develop better financial short-term forecasts of revenue than the accountants were able to develop using their normal, time series analysis and predictive, looking at historical trends, which I thought was quite interesting. I mean, the thing that I think about data analytics, it does strike me a bit like the concept of sustainability. I mean, sustainability, a very important thing in a lot of our lives in finance as well, but actually covers a huge array of different possible topics. And then I think data analytics is a little bit like that. And I wonder if I can call on each of the three of you to maybe give me kind of one slightly smaller bucket that people might think about in terms of how they could apply and use data analytics. Maybe Chris first.
Yeah, it's a great question actually, and it's a good observation. There's loads in here, and I think as we saw in the Inflow slide, I think there might have been 40, 50 little comments around that 4-box matrix that are massive areas of learning. So I think the first thing to understand with data analytics is it's a team sport, and we have a role in it. But we've got to decide what role that is, and I liken it to my 7-year-old son playing football. It's a bit like, at the moment there's no rules. We're all chasing the ball. No one wants to go in goal. No one's listening to the coach. So I think what we need to do is understand our role within data analytics, and that means for me that we need to be more, data literate. So I think any training around literacy, and I think we'll come on to this in a bit, would help the accountant understand the sort of opportunity in data analytics. I think the other bucket, if you like, is using what we already know. So this isn't necessarily new learning, but it's understanding the business. It's understanding, what we would call the domain expertise within a data analytics project. It's bringing context to the questions that we're trying to answer in a data analytics project. And, it's easy to sort of forget or underestimate your strengths, but your knowledge of finance, your knowledge of the data, your knowledge of the business is a really important part of any data analytics project. So go find the questions that need answering. It's not necessarily a data first data science project starting point. It's what do we want to answer? Ask the business that. And I'm just going to sneak in a third bucket because it's super important, and it has been talked to, there's the visualization side of things. We used to run sort of big data analytics projects in Vodafone, and many great message was lost in the communication, the visualization of that data. And I think we've all experienced this a bit actually with the pandemic visualizations that are coming out. It's like, what are we actually looking at here? We're quite critical when we have graphs and visualization put in front of us. So learning the fundamentals of data visualization and what works in certain contexts or certain data sets is super important. And don't underestimate that, because that is hardwired to your communicator role, your advisory role, the sort of theme of finance business partnering.
I'm sure some of us will remember those Boris's updates regularly, and some of the graphs that he would throw up. And I mean, I'm a trained economist and a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and I had no idea what was going on in some of those graphs. They were just utterly meaningless. So absolutely, I think visualization is so critical. Mike, can you add a bucket onto what Chris has already given us?
Yeah, sure. I like to think of the buckets as descriptive analytics tools, predictive analytics tools, and then prescriptive analytics tools. And so something like visualization would fall into a descriptive category, where it's seeking to describe the state of the world. And when we're thinking about a visualization, we can be thinking about using visuals to explore and understand a new data set. So I'm just looking for relationships and trends and patterns in my data. And we can think about it as explanatory, as communicating with those visualizations. That involves an understanding of how our brains process visual cues so that we can create a visualization that tells the story, communicates what we're trying to communicate effectively, and isn't distracting or misleading or unethical. Predictive analytics to me would be trying to make some prediction. Is this loan going to default or is it going to repay? Is this patient in the hospital, how many nights are they going to require? What sort of treatment are they going to require? These sorts of predictions that look for subset of variables to explain what's the ultimate outcome. And then a prescriptive situation would be an algorithm that's actually making a recommendation or a decision. So something like a pricing model, right? You could have, you could think about an airline whose pricing is dynamic, and an algorithm that's recommending prices for different routes. A self-driving car that's making a recommendation about what to do, what speed, and which direction, and what to do in a particular situation. And so as we're thinking about, this world of data analytics, you don't need to be a computer scientist or a data scientist to participate in these activities. Something like visualization is it's low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. And it's something that I think a lot of people can pick up and become well-versed in some of these principles and really be really effective in that sense.
Fantastic. I like those descriptive, predictive, prescriptive categories. I guess when Netflix tries to tell me what I should watch, I guess that's prescriptive, isn't it? Based on my past viewing habits. Doesn't always get it right, if I'm honest. But Stephen, have you got another bucket you can add on to what Chris and Mike have already raised? Oh, you're on mute. Here we go. You're on mute, Steve. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, I fully subscribe to the view that Chris had about this being a team sport. I mean, for me, I work within AAT's marketing department. So, we've seen the relationship that we have with our finance colleagues being quite different now. And I guess, with us working together much more towards, I guess, supporting business decision making. And they help us with, financial information. We provide them with information about research, insights from the customers. So it all comes together as part of one mix. And for us, really, a lot of it boils down to, simple question around so what. And that's the test that we apply to most things that we try to do, whether it be around analytics, whether it be about financial information they share with us, and whether it be around customer insights, to try and bring that all together and then share that, both up and down across the organization to help us to identify, risk, to identify opportunity, and look at ways in which we might be able to do things differently so we can become more efficient. And the key part of that is making sure that, we all understand our roles, and we do all focus on this as a team rather than people perhaps thinking that, they've got to try and do everything themselves.
Thank you, Stephen. Chris, I mean, in terms of where data analytics would impact on an organization, at what levels do you think it needs to be a consideration, in terms of from trainee to senior leader?
Top to bottom, because, we've all, there's potentially people coming in at the bottom who are, more tech savvy than the leadership team. And we're starting to see trends around reverse mentoring. It started with social media. It was like, come on, boss, why aren't you on LinkedIn? That sort of conversation. Have you seen this on, anything from Twitter to Snapchat? It started there, but now we're starting to see, people really, Generation Z, really pushing this sort of app first, tech savvy, AI savvy conversation. And they're going to judge what they find internally, I think, quite harshly. If their experience on their phones is far outweighing their experience at work, I think that they're going to be quite uncomfortable with that, whereas before we might have put up with it. So I think there's a need for senior leadership to acknowledge that there's a shift in this market from a talent point of view. And specifically on data analytics, I think they need to understand that the power of it and the investment that's required, because, there isn't a silver bullet with a lot of this stuff. Data analytics output is amazing when it's done well, but you might spend sort of 80% of your data analytics projects just getting the data together. So understanding the process and the investment and the talent is super important, and that's sort of more of a strategic decision.
And I was quite interested to see Paul's views on those 6 skills that seem to map quite closely between what an accountant tends to be good at and what a data analyst needs to be good at. I mean, Stephen, what was your take on that? Or what do you think are the key skills for actually implementing and using data analytics specifically in organizations? And you're on mute again, Stephen.
Sorry, I'm doing my best to make sure that the traffic outside can't be heard across the country. But yeah, I think for me, it's this, again, this changing role. It's back to some of the points that I made earlier around, accountants perhaps looking outside a little bit more. I think one of the key parts of this, which is often overlooked, is context. I was chatting to someone on a call recently who was talking about, one of the accountants that he worked with, someone within the data team who focused on what he thought was a really big opportunity, and when he shared that with the senior team, it turned out that the product that he thought had huge growth potential was only available in the Middle East and wasn't available in the UK. And I think for some of this, yes, we need to develop these advisory skills. Yes, it's about building relationships. But I think a key component is, making sure that you understand the organization, making sure that you understand, what it is that they're trying to do, the products that you have, the customers, and I using that as part of the bigger mix, to develop the opportunity, and again come back to that whole point around, well, so what? What does it mean?
Mike, any thoughts on skill sets to be a good accountant / data analyst, or even business analyst?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that at one level, there's being able to formulate a question and then answer it using data tools. Or here's a data set. What can I do with it? How can I understand it? And how can I use it to formulate, and answer questions? So that's, I think, one way. And we've touched on this before with sort of general data literacy and some skills like visualization. I think the second level is understanding some of the more complex algorithms. What is AI and machine learning all about anyway? What do these algorithms do? What can't they do? What are their strengths and what are their limitations? What can I realistically expect them to do? Because a lot of survey evidence suggests that there's a real gap between what data science teams can accomplish and reasonably do, and what executives think they can do, right? So we need to sort of close that gap, and one way to do so is by gaining some understanding around what those algorithms do. Now, I don't think that takes a degree in data science or becoming a full-time analyst, but I do think that learning a little bit of writing a little bit of code is not a bad way to get some empathy and understanding for what these algorithms do, what they can do. In the end, we're going to need to be, I think it's just as a profession, increasingly data literate, and also skeptical consumers of analytics technology.
Well, let's imagine a field with a fence in it, actually, because I think data analytics, there's two very different threads to it that I can see. I mean, I've sat in on some forums in recent months which come at it from a very techie, run by professors of machine learning and people with advanced statistics, which my sense is that's probably going to be way too complicated for a typical accountancy firm to be worried about. There's then our side of the fence, the finance side of the fence, and I've seen some chat comments around Tableau and BI, and Paul mentions sort of Python and SQL. I mean, coming to you, say, Chris, I mean, do you think that accountants need to understand Python at a level?
I love what Michael just said there around sort of empathy for the data scientists. I don't think this is about being a data scientist. So, what are we trying to gain out of learning Python, SQL? is it to go and be a data scientist? Absolutely not. Is, you know, and some of those technical forums that you probably joined are super helpful, but they are very much, you know, statistics based, math based. We're unpacking algorithms, and as Marcus said as well, it's around, you know, I think we need to understand that, you know, algorithms aren't perfect. It's not just the data, but an algorithm isn't perfect. It's not just what you've done in the past on Amazon that leads to that prediction. It's the actual algorithm itself has its own performance level. So is it performing well? Is it not performing well? And we need to sort of understand that a little bit. So I think it's if you want to understand more about how these projects run, if you want to be more data literate, let's say, I think then yes, a basic understanding of maybe SQL before Python, but something around this high level understanding will help you empathize and be part of these projects. But the goal here isn't to become a data scientist, no matter how much the Harvard Business Review says it's a sexy role. You still have a job to do in finance. We have a solid career in accounting and finance, and this stuff's just going to augment it. It's not for you to go and do something different.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. And I've just had a private message, I won't say who from, saying, is this Monty Python we're talking about? It's not. Python is, I believe, the most popular coding language used in data analytics. SQL and R are a couple of other ones that are used. I think Tableau and Power BI are more tools that are used for rather than the actual coding languages. Stephen, what are your thoughts on, you know, do accountants need to be able to code?
My personal view, and let's say I'm coming at this from the marketing department, is I would say no. I think I would prefer the accountant to focus on developing their skills, you know, around the finance side of things. And, you know, in my perfect organization, yes, I think they would need to have some empathy with the data scientists, but I would prefer them to be focusing on, you know, understanding the information and using that to engage, you know, with what they know around the finance of the organization. And as I mentioned before, as Chris has mentioned, you know, we're working as a collective. So you would have the data scientists, you would have the marketing team, you would have the finance team who would be working together.
Blimey, so we're saying, as well as being great communicators, stakeholder managers, and all the rest of things accountants are now expected, we've also got to have empathy as well. Blimey, because there's no end to the skills an accountant needs.
Yeah.
So just to finish off this panel discussion, and just in a minute each, actually, a top tip, because we've got a lot of leaders of organizations on the call and who will be, I think, watching this on record, just a top tip for leaders in terms of what you think should be a top priority for them to sort of focus on and consider. Maybe coming to you, Mike, first.
I think that there's no one size fits all approach to analytics, right? There are massive multinational corporations who really need to think very clearly, deeply about analytics adoption throughout the organization. Chris mentioned his experience at Vodafone. I teach a business case on Vodafone, which invested very heavily in analytics and carefully implemented cultural and ethical considerations around the organization. But for other smaller organizations, just be, you know, it's okay to let this evolve and be careful and you know, choose what works for you.
Fantastic. Stephen?
Yeah, I think for me it would be keeping it simple. You know, making sure that, you know, you're focused and using this information to support your business decision making, support your business strategy, and, you know, embrace it. I think this is a great example where the qualification, you know, that you've all got, that we've all got, is really important. But, you know, equally, you know, that's especially in this field, I think, likely to become outdated within days, within weeks. You know, you and I, Gareth, have talked about this before, about, you know, the need for qualifications around software, around data analytics. And I think this really emphasizes the need for the professionals and for the professional bodies to embrace not only the qualifications, but really to focus on CPD, making sure that you know what's out there, making sure that you know what works for you, and developing this, you know, well-rounded skill set so you can add value and have an impact.
And I can see Chris has actually just made a comment in the chat box around, I mean, I think, you know, we all see technology advancing to the point where it becomes very user-friendly. You don't really need to understand how it works to use it. You know, we've seen that in virtually everything. But Chris, a final tip?
Yeah, I would say, you know, embrace it, right? See it as an opportunity. I think there's been a lot of negative press around AI. There's been a lot of negative press around the future of the profession. You know, people remember the Oxford report that said 95% of accounting's role will be automated. You know, like, why would we automate some of this stuff? Is there a cost benefit to automating some of this stuff? You know, do we want an algorithm to do that job? You know, that is not going to happen. So see this as an opportunity for augmenting your role and start on that journey. And I would say it's a non-technical journey at first. It's understanding, you know, the fundamentals, data literacy, data analytics, you know, how you might do this in theory, and, you know, go take your team on a journey over multiple years, you know, because I think this isn't just a sort of quick fix. You know, we need to sort of go with the change in the profession. And, you know, there's been comments on some of the tools that have been used a very, very long time ago. You know, we are still going on that journey. So just embrace it, and don't necessarily start with the tools. Start with the, you know, the concepts and the understanding of what we need to do, what we need to learn, what our role is within data analytics. Don't jump to being a data scientist and learning Python. You might start neglecting your day job.
Well, I mean, hopefully, you know, a discussion like this is a first step on that journey, just to becoming, you know, aware of the potential of data. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Mike. Much appreciate your input. So we're now going to invite each of the awarding bodies just to give 3 minutes or so of their own views. And I thought I might call on Adam from the ICAEW first, actually, given that we started off with Inflow, the platform that is embedded in ICAEW exams. And I know, Adam, you've been quite instrumental in leading a lot of these sorts of developments and keeping, you know, the Institute very future focused. So Adam, what are your thoughts?
Thanks very much, Gareth. Yes, my role is I look after the development and content of the qualification, the ACCA, and consequently I have had a lot of students cursing my name because of all the changes that we've been implementing over the last few months or years. But I wanted to go back to a comment that you made, Gareth, towards the start, where you were talking about a conversation you'd had with a partner of a Big Four firm. And what you said there confirmed what we learned. So back in 2016, we were under considerable pressure to change the qualification or introduce a new qualification for data scientists. The story was that the role of professional accountants was limited, and in the future there wouldn't be many of us. So that was 2016. Fortunately, we disagreed, and we pushed back, and we said, well, we have different views, and we see part of the role of professional accountant is to take the benefits from technology, to embed technology in what we do. And that sort of rolled forward 3 years. And in 2019, we had a significant consultation to see what the future of accountancy would be. And by then, the same people who'd been saying in 2016 there was no future for accountants were saying, well, the future of accountants is about data storytelling, and technology should be embedded within what they're learning. So what therefore is the role of a professional accountant? And obviously here we're talking about data analytics. Well, the role is around providing and engendering trust in data. And technology has a part in that. Technology has a part to manage the volumes, to manage the sources, and to provide the visualization which enables the data storytelling. It's only one small part. And what role, therefore, does the professional accountant have in relation to the technology? Well, a phrase which I came across recently, which I quite like, is the professional accountant should act as an informed buyer when looking at technologies. So that doesn't mean to say, and part of our consultation asked this question, do they need to be data scientists? Do they need to have coding skills? And the answer was no, it's a nice to have. There are some very talented people out there who can do both sides of that coin. But the professional accountant needs to understand what the technologies are doing and be able to ask the right question. But there are many other things, well, four other things specifically I want to refer to that the professional accountant needs to bring to this data storytelling and needs to bring to enable people to trust the data that they're providing. And one of those is professional skepticism. So, looking at the sources of that data, can they be trusted? What is it that data is telling me? Can I match that with other sources of data that I'm also getting? Part of it is the accountant's ethical code. Again, trust. To engender trust, you have to be trustworthy yourself. And so the ethics of technology and the ethics of data analytics is as important as the technology. Part of which is something we've all been talking about, and that's the communication skills. But not just communication skills, but the lifelong learning piece, the skills of remaining up to date. So we all learn, for those of us who have done qualifications, professional qualifications, we all learned an awful lot of them, but that's just the start. And any professional must continue to keep themselves up to date. But for those of us who are not in Generation Z, and as you can see, I chose to dye my hair grey rather than keep it brown just to distinguish myself. I'm of the older generation, and data analytics it's a phrase which has a particular meaning at the moment. But if you talked about data analysis, or indeed analytical review, going even further back, those are phrases which accountants understand. And analysis of data, telling the story of data, is what it is all about. But then the final sort of piece, which is crucial, is the core principles, the technical knowledge. And going back to the presentation we had on Inflow, it's a great tool, but if you don't understand double entry bookkeeping, you won't understand anything that tool is showing you. So the professional accountant has a very strong role to play in all of this, and understanding the technology is a part of that. But there is much more to it, and the skills of professional accountants really engender towards that. And I would point out that the skills that were shown for the data scientist made no reference to communication. And go back to 2016, and those firms that were saying data science is the way forward, I believe they tried putting some data scientists in front of clients and then realized there was a big gap between the data scientists and the professional accountants.
Thank you, Adam.
Just one last thing, looking to the future, all of what we've been talking about becomes increasingly important as the extended role of reporting and assurance around sustainability hits us. And all of this discussion will have a completely different slant, I believe, in the next year or two.
Yeah, an awful lot of overlapping themes that we are going to have to wrestle with. I think that point you make about lifelong learning, which you'd had already on the call, is so important. Clive, from the ACCA, do you have any views to add?
Well, I think I will concur with all above, because rather naturally one would. I think just pick up a couple of themes. This world of technology is going to continue to change. There's comments thrown through the chat there. Adam is entirely right. As somebody once expressed it, double entry bookkeeping is probably the world's greatest problem solving technique. And if you see it in that light, that skill set is fundamentally important. But to pick up on another theme Adam mentioned, Chris has mentioned as well, if we purely stick to financial data in the way we look at this, we're starting to absolve where the decision making is going to start to come from. So we have to realize that it's not just about financial data, it's about non-financial data, it's about customer sentiment. And technology is the business model of the future, and or the reality of today. And the pandemic has jumped us forward 5 years in 5 months, I think is the well abused phrase, if I can use that. So look, the reality is continuous education, absolutely important. Continuous evolution of the qualification, absolutely important. But take time to understand how technology is driving the business and the business model, as Chris said, because that gives you what the data model is. If you understand what the data model is, you understand what the business objectives are, you can problem solve. You then get into the predictive, prescriptive analytics that Michael was talking about, and really how we use that data is about how we forecast and scenario model. And what are we seeing through the pandemic? The importance of businesses understanding what the potential outcome might be. So this is something to embrace, this is something to take, and take the continuous education opportunities you need to do to understand them, because as Chris said, you need to be the educated communicator.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Clive. Really insightful contribution. And I think we've got Tim from CIMA joining us as well. Be good to hear from you, Tim.
Hello, Gareth. Hello.
Morning.
This has been really interesting, and thank you all for giving your insights. In the scheme of data visualization, I created a few slides to help. I'll just share my screen.
I'll make your co-host, which will let you share your screen, Tim. But remember, just a few minutes.
It'll be quite quick, I hope. So I just sort of created a few thoughts, and even sort of while going through this, when we, we've gone from analog to digital. And just picking on what Clive said there, it's not just about financial data. Analog, we could just listen to the person. It was just the financial data that we used to try and interpret reality. We've gone to digital. There's huge amount more data. Where the location, what you're even thinking when you type something into Google. There is a huge amount of data out there now. But big data is not necessarily better, it's just bigger. How can we make sense of all this data? And I think this is where the accountant comes in order to maintain its position in society. It's about making sense of this data, and yes, ethics. And yes, we can now start to measure things around sustainability and governance and society. So there's a lot more there. How are we going to make use of it? I think it's about owning and understanding the algorithm. It's not about writing the algorithm. Leave that to the data scientists. I mean, you talked about coming from a analysis paper, Gareth. I remember when I used to punch card and we'd advance to paper tape. And so I come from the data scientist perspective. But, I've been in accounting now for many, many years. And I think it's, what are the things that we need here in order to predict and prescribe the future? And we know how the A-level grades algorithm caused all sorts of problems, and now they're using a different way. How does this impact on where I think the changing competencies and are coming within our profession? We are guardians of the automated process. We need to, that is the sort of the basics of it, but it is about building this empathy and interactions with our stakeholders. It is about the knowledge of and having the skills to develop that empathy. And it's about co-creating value. We're not in our in our silos producing our spreadsheets. We are about being out there and talking to people and outward looking. My final little slide is reframing. What are we trying to do? And I think what we're trying to do is develop a critically reflexive forms of analysis. And this is questioning our assumptions. It's about what are your beliefs stemming from? It's about challenging these beliefs and how can we think about things differently? And, you know, we talk about education. I think it's about educating to ask better questions. There's a huge amount of data there. How are we going to ask the right questions of this data to create a better society, and a society for all of us? They're my few thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. Really powerful end there, actually. I think you're quite right. And I think this last year has probably shown us just how important, you know, community and society is for us. Excellent. Now, obviously, Stephen from the AAT was heavily involved in the panel discussion, but I think we've got Anthony on as well. I mean, have you just got a couple of quick comments, Anthony? Anything you hear from the employers you work with?
Hi, Gareth. Yeah, really enjoyed the session today. I think everybody had covered every single point I'd noted previously until right at the end, and then Adam kindly came in with double entry bookkeeping. I think one of the clear messages from my clients is actually they still need people to understand the numbers, to understand what's going in, what's coming out, to then have that confidence to be able to interrogate, to be able to draw conclusions from the data that they're seeing. I think it's a lot of it is driven now by those wider skills and behaviors. So having an inquisitive mindset, being curious, having that professional skepticism, being able to derive conclusions from the data they're seeing and then communicate that. As Stephen's described at AAT, we work a lot more collaboratively with our finance teams now through a sort of partnering model. And a lot of the information there to me, it's numbers. I don't fully understand it. So the ability to tell that story, the so what, to be able to communicate clearly with colleagues, with clients, is absolutely something that my clients are telling me is really important to them. So it's understanding those numbers, and it's being able to derive the conclusions, to interrogate, and then to tell the story from what they're seeing.
Thank you, Anthony. And I mean, I think a big change in recent years, you know, driven by technology, and now I guess data analytics will continue that journey, is that accountancy is less about input now. It's less about sitting, inputting transactions, ticking bank statements like I used to spend weeks doing when I was a trainee. It's now about output. It's now, you know, the boxes do most of the hard work. You know, the accountant is that value added stuff on interpretation, analysis, communication, stakeholder engagement, influencing. I guess, you know, I heard somebody the other day describing the chief financial officer as the chief strategy officer, which I thought was quite cool. That, you know, perhaps it's the accountants that are getting into the real, you know, driving seat of organizations. And so we've heard a lot today about communication, empathy, storytelling, which hopefully are the things that the boxes can't replace in the short term. And we've heard a lot about the need for lifelong learning, and actually whether it's technology, data analytics, sustainability, ethics, you know, the world does move on at rapid pace. And probably a good opportunity to hand over to finish us to Helen, who's been helping us with a lot of our CPD delivery actually to employers, but you're going to be doing some stuff on data, aren't you, Helen?
We are, yes. Thank you so much, Gareth. Yes, so it's really nice to have the opportunity to mention our upcoming CPD sessions that are really relevant given what we've been talking about today. And I echo what everyone else has said. It's just been really interesting to hear all the views. So I'm Helen from Future Finance Training, and we're delighted to be working in partnership with First Intuition to offer CPD training, that lifelong learning that we've all been thinking about today. And as we've been talking today, the area of digital literacy is so fundamental to the profession. We're all in agreement on that. And so we've woven that into our First Intuition CPD public programme for 2021. And we've got 2 sessions that I'd just like to mention to you briefly that are running in the next couple of months, in case they're of any interest to your staff or your clients. And the first one is on the 21st of April, and that's a 3-hour session running from 9:30. And that's looking at the power of digital technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the value of data. And so it's a great opportunity for professionals to get behind the popular media coverage of AI and all of the things we've been thinking about today, and to increase their digital literacy by exploring a wide range of practical technology related issues. So you'd be so welcome to attend, or your clients. And then separately on the 13th of May, picking up on what we've just been thinking about, Again, a morning session, 3 hours. We're going to look at the impact of digital technology on accountants today and in the future. So exploring the role of the impact of digital technology on the accountant's role. If you'd like any information about any of these sessions, you can email me. I'll put my email address in the chat box, or contact your normal FI contact and they'll put you in touch with me. But it'd be fantastic to see you if you'd think it would be helpful.
And we'll put the links actually along with all the collateral we create from this. We will circulate the recording and a summary of the discussion. But thanks for that, Helen. And that takes us to bang on 10 o'clock. Absolutely perfect timing. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Some great insight and speakers there. Thank you, everyone, for attending. That's been a marvellous crowd this morning. I hope that has stimulated some thinking. But thanks for joining us. And I do hope to see a lot of you in the very near future. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy your barbecues on Monday. Woohoo! See you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.